In a rundown orphanage, 13-year-old Calvin Cambridge lived with his two best friends, Murph and Reg. Basketball was his escape. He played it every day, chasing a dream much bigger than the court. But truth was, he wasn't any good. Compared to the neighborhood bully, Ox, Calvin didn't stand a chance. Still, he never stopped believing. While others gave up, Calvin clung to the hope that one day, a real family would adopt him, just like in the shows he watched on TV. However, Ox had no faith. To him, kids their age were already too old, past the point of being wanted. But Calvin refused to give in. Reality, however, was tough. The orphanage director, Stan Biddleman, forced the boys to sell candy on the streets every night, all in the name of raising funds. Game nights at the Staples Arena were the worst. Calvin had to stand outside, trying to sell to rushing fans who barely looked his way. No one cared, but there was one thing that kept him going. While everyone else ignored him, he could still catch glimpses of the game playing on the massive screens above the arena. For Calvin, that was enough to keep the dream alive. One night, during another long shift outside the arena, Calvin and Murph watched their favorite team, the Los Angeles Knights, lose a tough game. Disappointed, they stayed near the exit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the players. As Coach Wagner walked out, Calvin offered him a piece of candy, just a small gesture to lift his spirits. That simple act sparked a conversation. Coach Wagner was surprised. Calvin didn't just love basketball, he understood it. His knowledge of the game caught the coach off guard. Impressed, Wagner decided to buy the candy. But Calvin turned him down. He didn't trust where the money was really going. That honesty hit harder than any sales pitch. Instead of handing over cash, the coach handed Calvin something better: tickets to the Knights' next home game. Days later, the orphanage held a charity event, part fundraiser, part adoption fair. It was supposed to give the kids a shot at a better life. But reality hit hard. Just like Ox had said, no one looked twice at the older kids. All eyes were on the toddlers. The dream of finding a family felt even further away. Despite the unfortunate, Calvin didn't walk away empty-handed. He picked up a worn pair of second-hand sneakers, but these weren't just any shoes. They had the initials MJ stitched inside, hinting they might have once belonged to the legend himself, Michael Jordan. For a moment, Calvin felt like his luck had finally turned. But Ox couldn't handle that. Fueled by jealousy, he ripped the shoes away and hurled them onto a power line, leaving them hanging far out of reach. Calvin couldn't let it go. That night, with a storm raging overhead, he convinced Murph and Reg to help him get them back. They pulled it off, but in the process, lightning struck Calvin directly. What seemed like a freak accident did something no one could explain. It didn't hurt him, it changed him. Something inside him shifted. Calvin walked away with something new, a gift he never had before, a basketball-related superpower. And just like that, a kid who had nothing but dream suddenly had everything. This is the story of dreams, destiny, and a pair of shoes that changed it all. This is, like Mike, the timing couldn't have been better. The next day was huge. The Los Angeles Knights were set to face the Minnesota Timberwolves. Calvin showed up, tickets in hand, not just for Murph and Reg, but even one for Ox. During the match, the Los Angeles Knights were struggling. Their losing streak was driving fans away, and the team needed a quick fix. That's when a team executive came up with a bold move. During halftime, they bring a fan onto the court to play a one-on-one match against one of the Knights. It was meant to be lighthearted, fun, a way to win the crowd back. And the player chosen for the spotlight was Tracy Reynolds, the team's top star. Moments later, a random ticket was pulled, and a lucky fan turned out to be none other than Calvin. Tracy wasn't exactly excited to play against the kid, but he went along with it. When someone suggested he take it easy and let Calvin score twice, Tracy refused. 1 point was enough. He planned to shut things down after that. But Tracy underestimated him. Calvin lit up the court. He scored once, then did again. And just when the crowd thought it was over, he finished the match with a slam dunk. The arena froze in disbelief, then exploded with cheers. Calvin had just stolen the show. The crowd rose to their feet. Everyone applauded except one man, Tracy Reynolds. Calvin's unbelievable performance shook the arena, and it didn't go unnoticed. The team's management made a bold move. They gave him a one-day contract to play with the Knights. To seal the deal, they handed Biddleman $7,500. He took it without hesitation. Murph and Reg were thrilled. Their friend was about to suit up with real NBA players. Calvin was just as stunned, but deep down he had doubts. He knew it wasn't just skill that brought him here. He believed those old sneakers, possibly once worn by Michael Jordan, had something to do with it. As the boys talked, they didn't realize Ox was listening. And now that he knew the truth, he wouldn't stay quiet for long. Not long after, game day arrived. Calvin stepped into the arena full of hope. But the excitement quickly vanished. The coach never planned to let him play. Calvin was just a marketing trick, nothing more. Crushed but compliant, he swapped out his old sneakers for a flashy new pair. He figured it didn't matter. He wouldn't be leaving the bench anyway. As the game slipped further out of reach, the Knights were getting crushed. Desperate for a spark, Coach Wagner made a bold call. He sent Calvin in during the final quarter. Calvin was shocked. In the rush, he hadn't changed into his old sneakers. Panic set in. Instead of taking shots, he froze and kept passing the ball back to Tracy. Then, mid-play, Calvin called for a timeout. He told the ref he needed a break, but his real goal was the locker room. He ran straight to his bag and found them. The sneakers. The ones he believed held the power. Laced up and focused, Calvin returned to the court, and everything changed. He took control of the game. He scored with ease, made perfect passes, and turned the tide. By the final buzzer, he had led the team to an unforgettable comeback. The crowd roared, and Calvin was named MVP. News spread fast. TV outlets jumped on the story. And behind the scenes, the Knights front office made a move no one saw coming. They offered Calvin a contract for the entire season. It was a stunning deal for a 13-year-old kid barely taller than the ball boy. Calvin wasn't the only one celebrating. Biddleman was over the moon. As Calvin's legal guardian, he had full control and full access to the money. Until Calvin was adopted or turned 18, every paycheck went through him. But then came the twist. Biddleman claimed the contract had a clause. Calvin couldn't be adopted while it was in effect. The news hit hard. Calvin was stunned. But with no way to fight it, he pushed the thought aside. He was living every kid's dream, playing in the NBA. And things only got better when the Knights went on the road. For the first time in his life, Calvin got to fly on a plane.
Go down.
But while Calvin enjoyed the spotlight, it created problems for someone else. Coach Wagner made Tracy Calvin's mentor and roommate. Tracy wasn't thrilled. Being forced to look after the same kid who embarrassed him on national TV wasn't exactly his idea of a good time. But no one cared what Tracy thought. The decision had been made. On their first night as roommates, Tracy left Calvin alone in the hotel room and went out with a fan. Calvin took full advantage of the room service, and by the time Tracy got back after midnight, the place was a disaster. Calvin was passed out, the room was wrecked, and to make it worse, his loud snoring kept Tracy up all night.
Oh, man.
The next morning, Calvin casually mentioned to Coach Wagner that Tracy hadn't come back until 1 a.m., a direct violation of team rules. Tracy was hit with a warning. One more slip, and he'd be suspended. The damage was done, and Calvin's apology did little to calm him down. Still, even with all the tension, there was one thing Tracy couldn't ignore. Calvin was making the team better. Game after game, their connection on the court grew stronger. The Knights started winning again, and Calvin quickly became the star everyone was talking about. One night, Ox made his move. Still bitter and jealous, he tried to steal Calvin's magical sneakers. But before he could get away with it, Biddleman stepped in and stopped him. Ever since Calvin started bringing in money, Biddleman had been acting like a bodyguard, keeping trouble away. But Ox didn't back down. He told Biddleman straight out, Calvin's talent came from the shoes, not from skill. Biddleman ignored him, but the idea lingered in his mind. Meanwhile, Calvin faced trouble off the court too. Tracy was still distant, refusing to connect. Hoping to understand why, Calvin asked a teammate for insight. That's when he learned the truth. Tracy had a broken past. His relationship with his father was so damaged, he'd completely shut him out. If he could turn his back on family, it was no surprise he kept his distance from everyone else. Calvin didn't understand. For him, having a father was something many kids could only wish for. He couldn't see why anyone would reject that. Looking for answers, Calvin quietly slipped into Tracy's car before he drove off. He tried to lighten the mood, then asked the hard question. But Tracy stayed silent. He wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Tracy's late night stop turned out to be a pharmacy. He needed allergy meds and sleeping pills, but things went sideways fast. Distracted by the attractive clerk, he accidentally took the wrong pills, and drowsiness hit hard. Moments later, Tracy passed out behind the wheel at a red light. Time was ticking. Team curfew was just minutes away. If Tracy didn't make it back, he'd be suspended. Thinking fast, Calvin jumped into action. He took the driver's seat and rushed them back to the hotel. The ride was rough. He hit more than a few obstacles, but they made it just in time. But the next day, the consequences landed on Calvin. He was suspended for reckless driving. Only later did Tracy learn the truth. Calvin had done it to protect him. That moment changed everything. For the first time, Tracy let his guard down. They talked. Calvin admitted he feared the dark and couldn't sleep without the lights on. Tracy revealed his own fear, flying. But he faced it anyway. He encouraged Calvin to do the same. It was a turning point. The wall between them had finally started to crack. When Calvin returned to the orphanage, Murph shared shocking news. Some parents were finally coming to adopt him. That's when the truth hit. Biddleman had lied. The contract never blocked adoption. Furious, Calvin confronted him. But Biddleman tried to twist the story, claiming the parents only cared about Calvin's fame and fortune, not about him as a person. Calvin didn't buy it. He pushed back, and Biddleman reluctantly agreed to set up meetings with the best candidates. But it was another trick. The people Biddleman brought in weren't real options. They were strange, unserious, and clearly not looking to adopt. It was all a game. Biddleman wanted to keep Calvin under his control because the money hadn't stopped coming. Devastated, Calvin ran straight to Tracy's house. This time, Tracy welcomed him in. Calvin opened up. He told him everything: Biddleman's betrayal, Murph's sadness about possibly being left behind, and the pressure of a geometry test the next day. It was his worst subject, and he never understood it. Tracy stepped up. He told Calvin to invite Murph over, then sat down to help with the test. And to Calvin's surprise, Tracy was a great teacher. He used basketball terms to explain the math, and suddenly it all made sense. When Murph arrived, the three spent the night together, talking, laughing, and building the kind of bond Calvin had always hoped for. As Calvin and Tracy grew closer, their connection lit up the court. Their teamwork was sharp, fast, and nearly flawless. With each win, the Knights climbed higher, and now they were just one victory away from reaching the playoffs. Off the court, Calvin kept hoping for something more. A family. Deep down, he wished Tracy might one day become that person. To help make it real, Calvin planned a surprise. He brought Tracy's estranged father back into the picture. But it backfired. Tracy didn't want reconciliation. He was furious and told Calvin to leave with him immediately. That moment drove a wedge between them. The bond they had built began to fall apart. They stopped talking. Their rhythm on the court vanished. Without their usual spark, the Knights were defeated by the Chicago Bulls. Now, it all came down to one game against the Toronto Raptors. If they lost, the season was over. Then, just when things felt hopeless, new doors opened. A wealthy family from Bel Air, the Boyd's family, came forward. They wanted to adopt Calvin. The news of Calvin's possible adoption sent Biddleman into panic mode. Losing Calvin meant losing his biggest source of income. Desperate, he turned to Ox to confirm what he already suspected. The shoes were the key. Then, pretending to offer support, Biddleman convinced Calvin to wear a clean, stylish pair of shoes for his meeting with the Boyds, claiming it would help him make a better impression. Trusting him, Calvin left the magical sneakers behind and asked Murph to guard them. But Murph was just a kid, under pressure, and with Ox threatening to destroy a photo of his late mother, Murph gave in. The shoes were handed over.
Hi, Mom. Oh, good.
With the sneakers now in his possession, Biddleman headed straight to a gambling ring and placed a massive bet, $100,000 on the Raptors to defeat the Knights. Confident, he even told the bookie why Calvin no longer had the magic. While that was unfolding, Calvin was meeting the Boyds. But something didn't feel right. They were polite, well-dressed, and everything seemed perfect, but too perfect. Calvin felt out of place, like he didn't belong. The Boyds, unaware of his doubts, happily announced that the adoption would be finalized the following day. While Calvin spent time with his potential adoptive parents, Tracy sat alone, thinking about how distant things had become between them. The guilt weighed on him. Wanting to make things right, he did something he hadn't done in years. He called his father. They shared a quiet, honest conversation. It gave Tracy the clarity he needed. He was ready to adopt Calvin. The next day, just before the big game, Tracy walked into the locker room to tell Calvin. But before he could speak, Calvin proudly introduced him to the Boyds. Tracy stayed silent. Instead of sharing his feelings, he simply congratulated them on getting a great kid. Moments before tip-off, Calvin got a call from Murph. His magical shoes were gone. Biddleman had taken them. Without hesitation, Calvin left the arena, leaving his team stunned. He rushed back to the orphanage and quickly rallied the other kids. Together, they tied Biddleman to a chair, giving Calvin a chance to search for the shoes. Then Ox showed up. He moved to free Biddleman, but Calvin stopped him. He spoke clearly and directly. Biddleman never cared about any of them. He only saw them as tools for his own benefit. Those words hit hard. For the first time, Ox saw the truth and chose to stand with Calvin. With Ox now on his side, Calvin learned the location of the hidden shoes. They cracked open Biddleman's safe, grabbed the sneakers, and rushed to the arena. But they didn't know Biddleman had already escaped. Panicked, he called the bookie, begging for help. Realizing what was at stake, the bookie sent his men to intercept Calvin. But they were too late. Calvin and the others arrived just in time. The Knights were down by 21 points at the end of the third quarter, and the crowd was losing hope. But when Calvin walked into the arena, everything changed. The fans roared. His teammates lit up. Coach Wagner hesitated. Calvin had arrived late, but the players rallied behind him. With their support, the coach gave the green light.
Cambridge has arrived. The crowd was late. The Knights were trailing by...
Calvin hit the court, and the energy shifted fast. The Knights started fighting back. The crowd came alive. But then disaster. Calvin's shoes broke down mid-game. And with no choice left, he told Tracy the truth. The skills, the wins, it was never him. It was the shoes. Tracy didn't know what to think. But he gave Calvin something better than doubt, confidence. He told him the team needed more than a good player. They needed him. Calvin took the message to heart and agreed to keep going. But inside, he already knew his time in the spotlight was almost over. And maybe that was exactly what he wanted. To step back, to live like a regular kid again. During a timeout, Calvin gathered the team and made a bold announcement. This would be his final game. No matter what happened, whether they reached the playoffs or not, he was stepping away from the court. His teammates respected the decision and promised to give everything they had to win for him. The game came down to the wire. The Raptors were up 103-102. With just seconds on the clock, Calvin made a sharp move to shake his defender, then passed the ball to Tracy. Tracy took the shot and nailed it right as the buzzer sounded. The Knights had won. For the first time in team history, They were going to the playoffs. The arena exploded. Cheers, applause, celebration everywhere. Calvin joined in, soaking up the moment, but deep down he knew it was his goodbye. He thanked his teammates and quietly stepped away. And when it came time to choose, Calvin didn't go with the boys. He went home to the orphanage. A few days later, Tracy arrived at the orphanage with several Knights players and a life-changing announcement. The Los Angeles Knights would now sponsor the entire orphanage, covering everything the kids needed. As for Biddleman, he had disappeared, crushed by gambling debts he couldn't repay. But the biggest news came next. Tracy had officially adopted both Calvin and Murph. Reg found a new home too, welcomed by another caring family. From that moment on, Tracy, Calvin, and Murph started a new chapter, one filled with happiness, stability, and a real sense of belonging. And as the story came to an end, Tracy tucked Calvin into bed, gently asking if he wanted the light left on. For the first time, Calvin smiled and said he didn't need it anymore. And with that, the story closed. So the moral of the story is, if lightning gives you basketball powers through some crusty old shoes, use them to dodge adoption scams and remind everyone that child labor laws are apparently optional.